If a dog barks in the middle of a blizzard and no one's around to hear it, does it still save a life? That morning, no one in Silver Ridge could have guessed a dog was the only thing standing between life and death for a missing deputy. No one except maybe the old shepherd limping across a frozen lumberyard, ears twitching at something only he could sense. No collar, no name, just a stray. But what Viper knew what he smelled was a scream buried in silence. The town had stopped searching. They'd written it off as a freak accident, a missing patrolman in a snowstorm. Could have been anything, an avalanche, a crash, maybe a bear. But not this, not what Viper had found deep beneath the snow-packed ruins of the old lumber plant. Viper wasn't supposed to matter anymore. Not after what happened 2 years ago. Not after his partner died and he walked into the woods, never to be seen again. But ghosts don't just vanish. And some heroes don't wear badges, they remember them. It had snowed through the night, the kind of snow that covers everything and makes the world quiet like a secret. By sunrise, the entire northern ridge of Silver Ridge, Colorado looked like a blank canvas. White, still, empty. On the far side of town, past the train tracks and rusted fencing, stood a 3-story warehouse with shattered windows and a keep-out sign that hadn't meant anything in years. Locals called it Deadwood Yard because nothing good ever came out of it. But that morning, something moved across the snow. A large dog, black and tan ribs showing beneath a patchy winter coat. His back leg dragged slightly, favoring a limp. He moved slow, cautious nose low to the ground. He wasn't supposed to be here, but something had drawn him in. His name was once Viper, a K-9 trained for search and rescue in avalanche zones, earthquake sites, collapsed buildings. His nose could find what no one else could. But war didn't break him. Grief did. He had been paired with Officer Rachel Monroe, sharp-eyed, fearless, the kind of woman who didn't flinch in the face of fire. Until the day fire claimed her. An apartment complex collapsed mid-evacuation. Viper had clawed through the beams until his paws bled, but he couldn't get to her. And when the department tried to house him again, he escaped. He walked into the snow and never came back. Until now, a sound, sharp, human, muffled echoed from the warehouse. Viper froze, head cocked, ears up. Then it came again, a whimper. Not animal, not wind, human. He crept closer, paws leaving shallow prints in the powder. He circled to the back of the building where a vent cracked open at basement level. Steam fogged the edge. He leaned in. Inside, dim light flickered. And beneath that flickering light was a man. Slumped forward, hands bound, face bloodied, blindfolded. Viper's ears perked. The scent hit him next, blood sweat. And something else. Authority. That smell of uniform and duty and exhaustion. The scent of someone who once held command. This man wasn't random. This was Deputy Ben Walker. Back in town, Dr. Emily Carson unlocked the back door of Silver Ridge Veterinary Clinic. Her boots sank in slush as she stepped outside holding a small plastic bowl of warm chicken and rice. She placed it on the stone ledge near the fence line like she did every morning. "Breakfast is served," she said, softly scanning the trees. She didn't expect him to show. Most strays came and went. But this one, he was different. Quiet, watchful. The kind of dog that didn't just want food, he wanted a reason. And that's when she saw him. Out of the woods, Viper stepped forward. He didn't touch the food. Instead, he dropped something at her feet. Emily looked down. It was a police-issue boot. Leather, heavy-duty, torn, dirty, and soaked in melted snow. On the side was a patch, a silver pine tree, the symbol of the Silver Ridge Sheriff's Department. Her breath caught. Deputy Walker had gone missing 3 nights ago. She picked up the boot. Blood crusted the inside. The laces were frayed, one almost severed, like it had been ripped off. Her hands shook. But the dog, he just stared. Then without a sound, Viper turned and walked back into the snow. Emily didn't hesitate. She ran inside, grabbed her phone, and dialed. At the sheriff's office, Captain Ray Holt rubbed his temples as Emily recounted what happened. He was a tall man in his 60s, silver beard trimmed, close voice, slow and measured like someone who didn't waste words. "A dog brought you a boot." "A German shepherd," Emily insisted. "Big, scar on his ear, limp slightly. And that boot?" She held it up. "I've seen Ben wear these exact ones." He took it, turned it over. Inside the lining, faint letters spelled Walker. That's when his tone changed. "Where'd the dog go?" "Back north, toward the old lumberyard." He cursed under his breath. "No one's been out there in over a decade." Then he looked at her and said something he rarely said. "We're going." If you're just tuning into this incredible true story, Hit subscribe to Heroes for Animals for more powerful K9 rescues, true tales of second chances, and the silent heroes walking among us. You won't believe what happens next. Deputy Ben Walker blinked slowly behind the blindfold. He couldn't remember how many hours had passed. His wrists ached, his lips were cracked, hunger gnawed at him. But worse than the pain was the silence. Until now, he heard something, claws on concrete, breathing. Then warmth, a nose against his hand, a tongue, careful, deliberate. Ben flinched. "Hey!" His voice was barely audible. "Is that a dog?" He held still. Then the teeth came, not biting but tugging gently at the rope, testing it. Ben didn't know why, but tears stung his eyes. The dog moved again, this time to his blindfold. Soft, steady pressure. Then light. Faint, dim, pulsing light from a single flickering bulb. And in front of him stood the dog. Tall, battle-worn, a ghost from another life. A German shepherd with amber eyes. "Who are you?" Ben whispered. Viper didn't bark, didn't whine, he simply stared. Then he sat beside Ben like a soldier waiting for orders. Ben smiled through the pain. "You came back." At the same moment in the surveillance room at the station, Rookie Officer Kyle Reeves scrubbed through drone footage. A shape moved along County Road 18. He zoomed in. "Sheriff Holt, look at this." On screen, a German shepherd carrying something in its mouth, a boot. Timestamp 4:47 a.m., an hour before Emily made the call. Holt leaned in. "That's our dog," he murmured. "And he's not just wandering." Officer Dana Reed added, "He's leading us." Holt turned toward the hallway. "Gear up." Back behind the vet clinic, Emily placed another bowl of food, this time with a slice of salmon and a glove that once belonged to her late father, who'd been a ranger himself. She stood in the cold, whispering, "Come back, soldier." In the distance, a shape appeared, silent, watching, then gone. Back beneath the warehouse, Viper pressed against Ben's side. Outside, the wind screamed, but down in the dark, a heartbeat had returned. Not from a man, from a dog, from Viper. Deputy Ben Walker was still blindfolded when the growl came again. Low, controlled, not a threat, something more precise, intentional. He'd worked with dogs before K9 unit search and rescue drills, but nothing like this. This wasn't a mutt scavenging for scraps. This was something trained. Someone trained. He turned his head slightly toward the sound. "You still there, boy?" A soft exhale brushed his knuckles, and then lick, tug, pressure. The blindfold loosened. Ben blinked hard as dim yellow light stung his vision. His eyes hadn't adjusted to anything brighter than pitch black in what felt like days. Shapes formed. Walls, concrete, stains, and then those eyes. The dog sat square in front of him now. German shepherd, black and tan, older. One ear bent at the top like something had torn it, a limp barely visible in his back leg, but his eyes amber with something behind them. Memory, pain, purpose. Ben coughed dryly. "Where'd you come from?" The dog didn't move, didn't blink. He just stared as if waiting for an order only Ben could give. Back at the Silver Ridge Sheriff's office, Sheriff Ray Holt leaned over the edge of a map laid out on the squad room table. The red dot marked the old lumber yard, a patch of ghosted land no one had stepped foot on in over a decade. "No heat signatures, no patrol reports in over 10 years, he said, voice gravelly and low. Detective Dana Reed leaned against the wall nearby, arms crossed. She was sharp, precise, former Army CID before transferring to small-town law enforcement. She didn't spook easily. "This is where the dog came from?" she asked. Holt nodded. "That's what the vet says." Emily Carson, her description of the boot matches Walker's. His name's still on the lining. And the dog, she said, he wasn't just passing through. He came with a mission. Dana arched an eyebrow. "Stray dogs don't carry out missions. This one does." That afternoon, back at the vet clinic, Emily stood behind her building, hands stuffed deep in the pockets of her flannel jacket. A fresh bowl of beef stew steamed gently in the cold air. She'd added a few strips of salmon Viper's favorite, apparently. She knelt, placing the bowl and an old wool glove on the ground beside the rock where the dog had dropped the boot. "You earned it, soldier," she murmured, just loud enough to be heard if he was listening. Behind her, the wind rustled the pine trees like whispers. A shape flickered in the corner of her eye, but when she turned, nothing was there. Still, her heart kicked up in her chest. She had the feeling she was being watched. In the warehouse basement, Viper circled the perimeter, ears forward, tail stiff. He paused by the door and sniffed the base, then looked back at Ben. "You smell something?" Ben asked. The dog crouched. Then a sound, faint, boots on wood, above them. Viper growled just under his breath. Ben stiffened. His hands were still tied, wrists raw from the rope, his legs numb, but his instincts were still intact. "Is someone coming?" he whispered. The growl deepened, then silence. The footsteps paused. Ben strained to listen, barely breathing. Whoever it was, they were standing just above the basement door. Then came the slide of a metal latch, but the door didn't open. Whoever was there changed their mind. Meanwhile, back at the station, Officer Kyle Reeves played back thermal drone footage on a monitor. He paused the frame. "There," he said, tapping the screen. "Same Shepherd. Timestamped 4:47 a.m. yesterday. Heading southeast carrying what looks like a boot." Detective Reed leaned in. "That's the same boot Carson brought us," she muttered. Kyle nodded. "Exactly. And I ran a side check. There's a file in the K9 unit archives. Shepherd named Viper, 7 years old, search and rescue certified. MIA since his handler, Officer Rachel Monroe, died in that fire 2 years ago." Holt stepped into the room, brow furrowed. That the dog who disappeared during her funeral, same markings, ear scar, hip imbalance. And if this dog's acting on training, not instinct, then he's not just surviving. He remembers. Reed looked back at the screen. Then we follow his lead. Snowfall picked up again that evening. In her cabin just outside town, Emily sipped from a mug of tea while staring out the window. Her living room was small but cozy, handmade quilts, a wood-burning stove, stacks of vet journals beside the couch. She hadn't stopped thinking about Viper all day. Her father, a forest ranger before he passed, used to tell her, "Some animals are built for more. They just need someone to see it in them." Viper was one of those. She stood and walked to the kitchen, then returned with a plastic bag. Inside, a dog tag, worn and scratched. Her dad had given it to her with his gear after his final rescue mission. It read, "Not all who roam are lost." She held it tightly, then went to place it in the glove she'd left out back. In the warehouse, Ben drifted in and out of sleep. Pain throbbed in his legs, and his shoulders burned from the strain of sitting upright for so long. Every time he slipped too deep, the cold would yank him back. Then another sound. Click, scratch, the scrape of claws. Viper had returned to his side, now sitting upright, ears angled toward the door. Ben swallowed. "You think he's coming back?" The dog didn't move, just waited. Sheriff Holt, Detective Reed, and 2 deputies huddled in a back conference room. Holt placed the boot in an evidence bag and laid it on the table. "This changes our timeline. The dog had this hours before Carson found it." Reed pointed at the warehouse section of the map. "We prep a silent entry. No media, no chatter. We go in at dawn." "And if he's not there?" one deputy asked. Holt didn't blink. "Then we follow the dog." Night fell heavy over Silver Ridge. The wind grew sharper, whistling through the warehouse's broken windows. Inside, the basement light flickered. Ben stirred. He whispered, "Still with me?" The dog responded with a soft whine, pressing his body gently against Ben's leg. Ben smiled through cracked lips. "I don't know your name," he whispered, "but I'm betting someone used to call you partner." Back at Emily's clinic, she stepped outside again just before midnight. She didn't speak. She just sat on the back step with a wool blanket wrapped around her shoulders, watching the tree line. Minutes passed. Then movement, a dark shape at the edge of the woods. Viper. He didn't approach right away. Just stood there, half shrouded in snowfall, his breath steaming from his muzzle. Emily lowered her eyes. "You're scared to trust again, huh?" Silence. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the dog tag. She placed it in the food bowl and stepped back. Viper waited, then took a slow step forward. And another. In the early hours before sunrise, a convoy of 2 SUVs rolled down the access road toward Deadwood Yard. Snow clung to the trees like frostbitten lace. Inside one vehicle, Sheriff Holt sat in the passenger seat, flipping through Rachel Monroe's old K9 training logs. She said Viper could scent through 3 feet of concrete if the wind was right, he muttered. Reed looked up from her gear. "You think he's really leading us?" "I think he never stopped." Back in the warehouse, Viper stood near the basement door. He heard the crunch of tires, the sound of boots, voices, familiar ones. Steady, calm, rescue. Viper turned back to Ben and let out one short bark. Ben's heart jumped. "You're calling them," he said. The bark came again, this time louder, echoing through the concrete. And then the latch, sliding open. The lock slid open, but the door didn't move. Ben Walker froze. The dog beside him, the one he now thought of only as Viper, went still too. His muscles tightened, ears pinned, breath shallow. Then, silence. No creak of hinges, no rush of footsteps. Just the sound of snow shifting on the roof above them and the bulb overhead flickering faintly like a dying heartbeat. Ben exhaled slowly, afraid to speak, afraid to move. The room around them felt like a trap waiting to be triggered. Whoever had opened that latch hadn't changed their mind. They were waiting watching. In the conference room back at Silver Ridge Sheriff's Office, maps and mugshots covered the walls pinned alongside handwritten notes and red yarn connecting theories. Sheriff Ray Holt stood at the front, arms folded. "We have one shot at this," he said to the small task force. "We're not just looking for a missing deputy anymore. We're tracking someone who planned this down to the hour." Detective Dana Reed, always calm under pressure, flipped through aerial photos. "The building's basement is our entry point. No lights, no sirens. If Deputy Walker's alive in there, we don't want to spook the guy holding him." Kyle Reeves added thermal drones picked up heat movement in the southern structure, two sources. One small, one large, both moving. Reed narrowed her eyes, then we're not too late. Sheriff Holt nodded once. "We moved before dawn." Inside the warehouse, Ben blinked away the sting of the bulb's light. His ribs ached, his legs were half numb, and his wrists burned where rope met skin. But his mind was clear now. He knew he wasn't alone. And he knew whoever had been feeding him, taunting him, was close. From behind a wall came a creak, followed by the sound of something metallic scraping against concrete. Then footsteps, heavy, deliberate. Viper moved like smoke, sliding toward the shadows behind a rusted shelving rack, vanishing like he'd rehearsed it 100 times. Ben's heart thundered in his chest. The door groaned open. Raymond Cross was the kind of man most people forgot after first meeting him. Average height, thick-shouldered, mid-50s, a flannel coat stained with grease, deep-set eyes that always looked like they hadn't slept in weeks. But when he smiled, it wasn't forgettable. It was unsettling. He entered the basement holding a dented metal tray with a slice of cold meatloaf and a plastic water bottle. His boots left faint wet prints on the floor. Well, he muttered, "Look who's still breathing." Ben didn't respond. Ray snorted, "Still playing tough guy. You deputies are all the same. Big talk until someone puts you in the dark." He crouched in front of Ben, staring into his bruised face. "How's the head still ringing?" Ben clenched his jaw, but said nothing. "You know why you're here, don't you?" Ray's voice dropped almost gentle. Ben finally looked up. "You're sick." Ray's smile vanished. He stood and began pacing the room, muttering, "They think we don't matter. Men like me, the ones who got forgotten. But they'll see. You're just the start." In the corner, Viper crept closer. Ray moved toward the back wall, setting the tray down. "That man promised me peace. Said I could fix what I lost." He turned back toward Ben. "Said you were the perfect substitute." Ben's eyes narrowed. "Substitute." Ray raised a hand to his belt. But before he could reach it, Viper moved. Outside, the snow fell softly as dawn lit the sky with gray and pale gold. The strike team fanned out across the warehouse perimeter, boots crunching lightly on the frost. Radios buzzed quietly beneath their jackets. Sheriff Holt and Detective Reed approached the south-facing stairwell, flanked by Deputy Chris Malone and Officer Reeves. At Holt's signal, they stopped. Reed checked her watch, then nodded. They breached the door. Viper leapt from the shadows like a fired bullet. Ray barely had time to react before 80 pounds of muscle slammed into his chest. The two crashed to the floor, Viper's jaws locking onto the man's sleeve, not to rip, but to pin. Ray shouted and thrashed. The box cutter on his belt skittered across the floor out of reach. Ben flinched, watching helplessly from the chair. Then flashlights burst through the basement door. "Police hands where we can see him." Holt's voice boomed like thunder. Behind him, Reed swept the room with her rifle laser dot trained on Ray's forehead. Deputy Malone rushed to Ben, dropping to one knee. "We got you, Walker," he said, already sawing through the ropes. Ben blinked up at him, dazed. "The dog. He brought you." Reed looked at Viper, who now stood rigid over Ray's chest, growling low but not biting. Sheriff Holt exhaled, lowering his weapon. "Good boy," he murmured. Hours later, the ER at Silver Ridge General was quiet save for the rhythmic beeping of heart monitors and the soft squeak of nurse shoes on tile. Ben lay in a hospital bed, IV in his arm, bandages on his wrists and bruises running along his ribs. He stared at the ceiling in silence until the door creaked. Sheriff Holt stepped inside holding a foam cup of coffee. "You look like you got hit by a tractor." Ben managed a small smile. "Feels about right." Holt handed him the cup. "Reed's debriefing the suspect. Says he mentioned someone else, a man in a white van." Ben's expression hardened. "He said he was promised a replacement, that I was bought." Holt's jaw tightened. "We think this goes beyond Ray Cross. There's chatter about others, missing kids, abductions nobody followed up on." Ben sat up straighter, and the dog, Holt's side, disappeared again. "Slipped out the second you were airlifted, but I doubt he's far." Ben stared out the window where a line of trees waved gently in the breeze. He knew what to do, he said quietly. Flanked him, waited for the moment. He wasn't just reacting, he was operating. His name was Viper, Holt said, handing Ben a manila folder. Inside medical files, K9 evaluations, deployment photos. Ben stared at one. A younger Viper, standing next to a female officer in full tactical gear. Both looked proud, ready, whole. She was his handler, Holt added. Rachel Monroe died in that apartment fire 2 years ago. Ben ran a thumb along the photo's edge. He didn't just survive, he murmured. He remembered who he was. On the far side of town, Emily Carson stood in her living room, staring at the fleece blanket folded on her couch. There was a blood smear on one corner, faint, almost cleaned away. She hadn't cried. She didn't know how, but the ache in her chest felt like grief and hope tangled together. Her neighbor, Danny Farrow, walked in holding 2 mugs of coffee. "You okay?" he asked. Emily nodded, taking the mug. "I think he saved that deputy. I think he's still watching." Danny sat beside her. "He's more than just a dog." She smiled faintly. He always was. Back at the sheriff's office, Detective Reed sat across from Ray Cross in the interrogation room. The man stared at the floor hands cuffed to the table. "You said someone gave you a target," Reed said. "A man in a white van." Ray nodded slowly. "Said I'd be helping. Said the ones nobody missed were best. Strays." Reed's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean by strays?" Ray looked up at her for the first time, his voice cracked. "People no one looks for. Dogs no one calls home. Kids nobody wants back." Outside the room, Sheriff Holt turned away from the one-way glass. "Get the FBI," he said to Officer Reeves. "This is bigger than us." That night in the woods above Silver Ridge, Viper limped along a ridgeline, snow collecting on his back. He paused at a flat rock and lay down. Below him, the town glowed softly. He looked back once, eyes catching the light of the moon. And then he closed them. For now, the mission was complete. But the fight wasn't over. The cold was sharp enough to cut breath in half as the sun rose behind the pines. Atop the overlook, Viper lay curled into himself, one paw tucked under his chest, his eyes half closed against the wind. The town of Silver Ridge below blinked into color with the morning light rooftops glittering with frost. He could smell everything from up here. Wood smoke from chimneys, engine oil from plows, the faint metallic bite of snow-coated rails. But one scent pulled at him harder than the rest. Ben, the man he saved, the man who didn't flinch when their eyes met. Viper stood body stiff from the night air and began to descend toward town. The mission wasn't over. At the Silver Ridge Sheriff's Office, the lights buzzed above the war room as Agent Mike Hanley stood beside a wall-size map. Mid-40s, close-cropped gray hair, FBI jacket creased from the drive, and a face carved from discipline, Hanley radiated that no-nonsense DC energy that didn't quite match the pace of rural Colorado. "We've confirmed a sighting," he said, pointing to a spot west of the highway. An unmarked white van parked outside the old Cold Pines scout camp. Trail cams picked up activity 2 nights ago. Detective Dana Reed leaned in, the same time frame Cross mentioned. Sheriff Holt, arms crossed, stared at the map with his usual guarded calm. Ben Walker, still bandaged but upright, stood in the back of the room. "That's where we go next," he said. "We're not waiting." Hanley's eyes flicked to him. "You're still recovering." "He responded to me," Ben said, jaw tight. "You want to find him? I'm going." There was a beat of silence. Then Holt nodded. "He's right." Meanwhile, Emily Carson stood behind her clinic, pinning another strip of blue flannel to a pine branch just inside the woods. The fabric fluttered, gently infused with lavender oil and traces of old wool. She'd sewn in a patch from Ben's torn uniform, too, just a small piece, but enough. Danny Farrow stood nearby, loading cooked chicken into a shallow pan. His gloves were stained with grease, his cheeks red from windburn. "This the last marker?" he asked. Emily nodded. "I tracked the route Viper took after the rescue," she said. "If he comes back this way, it'll smell like safety." Danny looked down the tree line. "You think he still trusts people?" She didn't answer right away. "I think he's waiting for a reason to." Back inside the sheriff's office, Reed stepped into the tech room where Officer Kyle Reeves had pulled up the latest drone feed. "You've got something?" she asked. Kyle nodded. "Thermal pickup near the camp. Dog-sized shape. Moved east to west. Stopped near the basement vent." He tapped the screen, then barked. Once, loud, like a signal. Reed stared at the grainy image. "That dog just gave us a coordinate," she murmured. The operation rolled out quietly that afternoon. 2 black SUVs, 1 white tactical van, a convoy through frost-lined roads. Agent Hanley rode in the lead with Sheriff Holt. Behind them, Ben sat in the back seat, staring out the window, hands clenched in his lap. Reed sat beside him. "You good?" she asked. Ben nodded. "As long as he's out there, I'm fine." She glanced at the K9 vest lying across his lap. It was Rachel Monroe's old one. Her name faded but still visible in stitched black thread. I think he's been waiting to wear that again, Ben said. At Cold Pines, the snow muffled a sound like a curtain. The camp had been abandoned for over a decade, cabins collapsed ropes, rotted windows long blown out. But the white van was there, parked behind a collapsed structure mostly obscured from aerial view. The FBI team took positions in a wide arc. Snipers held overwatch from the trees. Two K9 handlers stood ready with thermal visors. But they weren't the ones Viper responded to. Ben stepped into the clearing, vest in one hand, boots crunching softly. Viper stood near the van, tail stiff, ears forward, eyes locked on the side panel. Ben moved slowly, arm outstretched. Good boy, he said softly. Viper barked once loud and sharp, then circled to the back of the van and sat. Ben froze. That's a signal, he whispered into his radio. Hanley gave the go. The team moved like shadows. The taller suspect emerged first, mid-30s, wiry ski mask on clipboard in hand, like he belonged. The second followed a heavier man armed. He kept glancing toward the van, paranoid. They didn't see it coming. Within 6 seconds, they were on the ground, cuffed, disarmed. Hanley yanked open the back doors. Inside, two kids, a girl and a boy, maybe 9 or 10, zip-tied, pale silent. They flinched at the light until Viper jumped in. He laid between them, warm and steady, and licked the boy's cheek. The boy whimpered. The girl finally cried. And when they reached out, both kids gripped Viper like he was the only safe thing in the world. The story exploded across national media by sunset. Cable anchors said the dog's name like it was folklore. K9 hero resurfaces after 2 years. Leads rescue team to missing children. But in Silver Ridge, things stayed quiet. Sheriff Holt stood outside the station watching the sun dip behind the ridge. Emily pulled up in her pickup wearing her dad's old Ranger coat and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Thought you might want this, she said, handing him a box dog, food toys, a fleece blanket. Viper trotted out from the back seat, sniffed the tote, then padded toward the steps where Ben was sitting. They met halfway. Ben knelt and held out the vest. You ready? Viper let the man slip the vest over his shoulders. When Ben stepped back, Viper stood taller. He wasn't just a stray now. He was back on duty. That weekend, a small crowd gathered behind the station. No big ceremony, no media, just folks from town, shopkeepers, teachers, firefighters, kids holding thermoses and tissues watching quietly. A small platform had been built, and at the center sat a badge, not for a man, but for a dog. An engraved collar tag that read, Viper Silver Ridge Sentinel. Ben stepped up in full uniform, still limping slightly. He knelt in front of Viper and clasped the tag onto his collar. Do you accept the call to serve again? He asked softly. Viper barked once, and the crowd erupted in applause. Emily wiped a tear she didn't admit to shedding. That's my boy, she whispered. In the weeks that followed, Viper walked every beat beside Ben. His stride slow but sure. Kids in town waved when they saw him. Residents left treats on the courthouse steps. He was no longer a ghost. He was a guardian. Emily launched a new initiative from her clinic, the Second Chance Project, a retraining program for strays with potential. Dogs with no names pulled from shelters and brought back into the light. Viper was the face of the program. Every Saturday, Ben brought him to the rec field where kids gathered, parents watched, and the town found something to believe in again. Not just in dogs, but in second chances. Sometimes God doesn't send angels with wings. Sometimes he sends them with fur, scars, and a quiet sense of duty that never dies. Viper was once forgotten, but he never forgot who he was. The snow hadn't stopped in 2 days. Thick, wet flakes clung to everything. Tree limbs, telephone wires, patrol cars parked outside the sheriff's station. But no one inside Silver Ridge's command center seemed to notice the weather. Not when there was something much darker swirling inside. On a dry erase board in the middle of the war room, Agent Mike Hanley had scrawled one word across the top in thick black marker: network. Below it, blurry surveillance photos, burner phone call logs, and missing persons flyers from towns nobody had heard of. Edgewater, Dawson's, Fork Mill, Hollow. All rural, all isolated, all with stories like Ben's. Sheriff Ray Holt rubbed a hand across his jaw as he stared at the board. His silver wedding band clicked softly against the plastic marker in his other hand, a nervous tick he hadn't shown before. They've been targeting small communities, Hanley said, tapping the board with a capped pen. Looking for people who fall through the cracks, strays as Cross called them. Cross wasn't smart enough to build this himself, Reed said from across the room. He was a pawn, used and discarded. Ben stood nearby, arms folded. Viper sitting at his side like a silent shadow. He watched the board, not moving, his knuckles white around the cuffs of his shirt. He said someone in a white van brought me, Ben muttered. Offered me as a replacement. Hanley glanced over. You remember anything else? Ben shook his head. Just a voice. Male. Calmer than Cross, like he'd done this before. Reed added, "We've been tracking registered vans in a tri-county radius, cross-referencing with burner phone activity. There's one spot pinged more than once." She pointed to a red pin on the map. Scout Camp, Cold Pines. You were right, Sheriff. That's where it all started. That afternoon, Emily Carson stood in her clinic's front office, organizing a box of donated dog gear for the Second Chance Project. A fuzzy, half-stitched stuffed raccoon poked out the top of the box. She smiled at it. Then the bell above the door rang. Viper entered, first tail low, but wagging once when he saw her. Ben followed, moving better now, the bruises on his face fading, though the stiffness in his shoulder still lingered. "I brought someone who wanted to say hi," he said. Emily knelt. "Hey, soldier." Viper padded up to her and rested his head against her chest. "You're a long way from the warehouse," she whispered. Back in the sheriff's office, Reed reviewed K-9 records from the past decade. Photos of dogs, handler assessments, training outcomes. Viper's file was marked MIA until recently. She clicked into a folder labeled SAR Monroe. It was Rachel Monroe's unit archive. Inside were notes in her handwriting, search and rescue drills, nighttime simulations. An entry from 2 years ago dated 1 week before the fire that took her life. Viper doesn't give up. Ever, he waits for the right moment and makes his move. Sometimes I think he understands pain better than I do. Reed read it twice, then closed the file, quietly moved. At the Cold Pines camp, FBI and local law enforcement swept every cabin and vehicle on the premises. Hanley walked slowly through the perimeter with a radio in hand. "We found traces of accelerant," he said into the mic. "Somebody was planning to burn this place down." In one of the collapsed cabins, an officer called out, "Sir, you need to see this." Hanley entered. The air smelled like mildew and old rubber. Taped to the wall of the cabin's far side were dozens of photographs, kids, teens, and adults. Some were printed from social media, others looked like DMV photos or school IDs. All had red X's or circles drawn in marker. "Targets," Hanley said grimly. "Some marked complete." A deputy stepped up beside him. "Whoever's doing this isn't done." Later that night, Ben and Emily sat on the back porch of her cabin. Snow drifted lazily down, settling in soft piles on the railings. Viper lay nearby, eyes open, alert. "I thought he was done," Ben said softly. "After the rescue, after the medal, I thought he'd just fade back into the woods." Emily glanced at Viper. "Dogs like him don't retire. They repurpose." Ben nodded. "He's showing us something. We just have to keep watching." Emily sipped her tea. "Do you think Rachel would have been proud?" Ben didn't answer right away. "She was more than proud. She built him for this. He's her legacy." The next morning, a package arrived at the sheriff's office. No return address, no postage. Just a brown paper envelope left at the front desk before sunrise. Inside, a burner phone and a note typed, "You're looking in the wrong place. The next delivery is already on its way. Good luck." Hanley picked up the phone with gloved hands. "We'll trace it," he said. "But they're getting bolder." Sheriff Holt turned to Ben. "You think he's got anything left in him?" Ben looked down at Viper, who sat watching them, both ears perked. "He hasn't stopped." That evening, the command center buzzed with quiet urgency. Reed and Reeves ran GPS mapping software on the burner phone, triangulating pings. They cross-checked delivery routes, old scout camp employees, missing van registrations. And then something clicked. A signal had bounced briefly near an industrial park on the outskirts of a town 2 hours west. Abandoned rail line, old grain silo, no cameras. Perfect place for a handoff. Hanley drew a circle on the map. "We hit it tonight. Quiet. Fast." Holt nodded. "And we bring Viper." Reed raised an eyebrow. "You think he'll track again?" Ben clipped the vest onto Viper's back. He never stopped. At 1:17 a.m., the convoy rolled silently into the abandoned grain yard. Snow covered most of the ground, but the van tracks were fresh, barely an hour old. Viper sniffed the air and pulled forward. Ben unclipped the leash. "Go, boy." The dog moved fast, ducking between crumbling concrete and old machinery. Then he stopped. One loud bark. Team Alpha closed in. Behind the silo, a large white van idled. Hanley signaled, "Go." The team surged forward. Inside the van, they found a small boy, maybe 7, taped at the wrists, a bruise on his cheek. But alive, and wrapped around his feet, was a piece of red fabric. Viper's eyes narrowed. It wasn't just any cloth. It was from Rachel Monroe's old K-9 training towel. Ben crouched beside the van, eyes wide. "They're sending us a message," he said. Reed asked, "What kind?" Ben looked toward Viper. "They know who he is." The wind picked up over the fields outside Silver Ridge as the sun broke over the Rockies. Inside the sheriff's office, tension filled every hallway like something unspoken was about to surface. Officers moved with a quiet urgency. Phones buzzed low. Printer trays overflowed with updates. Everyone was watching the map now, watching for the next move. But Viper wasn't watching. He was pacing. His nails clicked against the linoleum as he trotted from the war room to the dispatch desk, back and forth sniffing doorways, pausing at the exits like he knew the clock was ticking faster than anyone else realized. He'd slept only a few hours since the silo raid, and even then only in shifts, head resting lightly on Ben Walker's boots, ears twitching at every creak. He hadn't barked since. In the conference room, Agent Mike Hanley stared at the burner phone logs. The industrial park handoff had been too well-timed, too precise. The boy rescued from the van had been shaken but alive, and according to medical staff, recently cleaned and clothed. This wasn't just trafficking, this was branding. Sheriff Holt ran a palm down his face. "They're mocking us," Hanley nodded grimly. "They're also studying us." Detective Dana Reed flipped open a file, her expression tight. The red cloth that was Rachel Monroe's. They either found it or took it. Ben stood behind her, arms crossed. "This is personal." "And calculated," Hanley added. "They're watching what gets attention. The dog's face is on every TV screen now. The Miracle K9. Reed looked up. "Then let's use him." That evening, the sheriff's office released a carefully staged photo to the press. Viper in uniform, standing in front of the flagpole, his tag shining in the winter sun. The caption was simple. He doesn't just follow orders, he follows hearts. It took less than an hour for it to go viral. Within 2 days, over 100 tips poured in. Van sightings, strange men in rural towns, kids seen and then gone again. One stood out: a woman in a town called Dry Hollow had seen a child being led away from a diner by a man in a white coat, then driven off in a panel van. She never saw the child again. Hanley's team ran the vehicle. Stolen plates, but the direction matched a service road winding toward the Idaho border through thick forest. No cameras, no patrols, just dark roads and tall trees. Sheriff Holt circled the area on the map. "That's where we go." The team rolled out under moonlight. No headlights, no radios, just instinct. Ben rode in the back seat of the second vehicle. Viper lay across his lap, eyes open, breathing slow. He hadn't moved much in the last hour, just watched. "You ready, partner?" Ben whispered. Viper didn't answer, but when Ben opened the door, he followed. The road was rough gravel and ice. Trees leaned over like guards trying to keep the world out. About 2 miles in, the vehicle stopped. They'd found tire tracks and prints. 3 sets of boots, 1 dog paw. Viper's ears perked. He surged forward. The team followed. In a clearing up ahead, a lone cabin sat tucked into the trees. Lights off. Smoke trailing from a rusted chimney. A generator clicked in the distance. Reed looked through binoculars. 2 men, one moving inside, one on the perimeter. Hanley gave the order, "Alpha team, wait for my signal." Ben knelt next to Viper. "We go quiet. You know what to do." Viper nudged his hand gently, then slipped into the shadows. He was almost invisible even with his vest. 30 yards ahead, Viper paused. A figure moved from the front door to the side, checking locks. Viper crouched behind a log. The man opened a metal case and removed something shiny, a syringe. That's when Viper moved. A blur of tan and black launched from the brush. The man yelped and dropped the syringe as Viper tackled him into the snow. His rifle fell just out of reach. Seconds later, officers swept in. Police hands, lights flashed, shouting. The front door burst open. Another man ran, holding something bundled in cloth. A child. Ben didn't think. He ran. The man bolted toward the trees, child slung under his arm like cargo. Ben closed the gap, his shoulders screaming in pain, but the man was faster. Then Viper. Out of nowhere, the shepherd cut across the tree line, slammed into the runner's legs. The man went down hard. The child hit the snow, crying. Ben scooped her up. "You're okay," he said breathlessly. "You're safe now." Viper stood guard over the man, growling. Hours later, back at the station, the girl was identified as Hannah Delgado, 6 years old, taken from her foster placement 3 weeks prior. There was no Amber Alert, no paperwork, just another untraceable. Until Viper. In the days that followed, the network began to crumble. Suspects flipped. Hard drives were found. Abandoned vans traced to ghost identities. But in Silver Ridge, the people weren't focused on the headlines. They were focused on the dog, on Viper, the one who hadn't given up. A month later, the town held a gathering in the community park. No stage, no podium, just folding chairs, hot chocolate stands, and a wooden sign that read, "Welcome home, Viper." Ben walked him through the crowd slowly. Kids patted his head. Elderly women cried and said prayers over him. Veterans saluted. At the front, a small plaque had been installed under the flagpole in honor of those who served without asking for recognition. Viper, Silver Ridge Sentinel, 2015 to 2024. Emily stood beside the plaque, smiling through tears. I don't think he ever needed to be called back, she said. Ben looked down at Viper, who now sat perfectly still, tail sweeping slowly behind him. He never left, Ben said. That night back at Emily's cabin, Ben poured 2 cups of tea and set one on the floor beside Viper's dog bed. Viper lay there, his chest rising slow and steady eyes fluttering closed. Ben sat on the floor beside him. You gave this town something we couldn't find in ourselves, he said. Hope. Viper didn't respond. But when Ben reached out, the dog placed his paw in the man's hand like a handshake. Only the two of them understood. In the months that followed, Viper remained on duty, not chasing suspects, not tracking blood trails, but walking alongside school buses, visiting firehouses, standing quietly in courtrooms where rescued kids gave testimony. He became a symbol, a sentinel, a soul who never gave up on people even when they gave up on him. Because sometimes the greatest heroes don't speak. They don't shout or stand in spotlights. They simply show up again and again. Until the work is done, thank you for following Viper's incredible story of bravery, redemption, and purpose. Now we want to hear from you. What would you have done if this stray dog showed up at your door with a bloodied boot? Would you have trusted him like Emily did? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to Heroes for Animals for more real-life stories of courage, loyalty, and the four-legged guardians who walk among us. May Viper's legacy remind us all, you don't need a badge to save a life, just a heart that refuses to give up.